Well, greetings, vinyl community, and welcome to VC Friday. This week's video is a label tribute. It's a salute to the Composers Recordings Incorporated label, or CRI Records. CRI Records was founded in 1954 and started releasing albums in '56, and over a period of almost 50 years, they put out over 600 albums of contemporary American classical music. And literally hundreds of American composers got their first chance to be on a record through CRI. The label was started by composers Otto Luening, who was a very advanced contemporary composer, the big conceptual guy, Douglas Moore, who was wealthy, so I guess he was the money of the operation, a man who had inherited wealth and was able to compose at his leisure, and the businessman Oliver Daniel. He was the record company executive, so he had the business expertise. And with such a huge catalog, you'll see CRI records around a lot. Some of them are pretty collectible, some of them command a little bit of money, a lot of them are just cheap heat. They tend to be identifiable. They have a certain look. Frankly, kind of clunky graphic design on many of them with very bold typography. But a lot of stuff where you can find some very cool, experimental, or just interesting music for not too much cash. And a lot of them just got kind of dumped on the market, maybe when the label started putting out CDs in the late 80s. So it's not that rare to find sealed copies. So keep your eye out for CRI, and I'll be showing half a dozen recent additions on the label to my own collection. And we'll start with one of the earliest releases on the CRI label. This is catalog number 106, but this is a later reissue. The album was originally a mono recording released in 1956, and the original version had a white cover with a border and these insignias sort of up here. Then when it was reissued, there was a mono reissue and a rechanneled stereo reissue. This is the rechanneled stereo. The mono version has this same cover design, except that it's white up here and orange down here. So very easy to distinguish between the two. This is the music of Henry Brant and Irving Fine. I talked about I talked about Henry Brant not too long ago on a video where the Brant album shows on the thumbnail. And he was a really interesting composer with a lot of interests in spatial music, music that had to be heard with the instruments placed in various spatial locations around the listener. Also music that involved multiples of the same kind of sonority. And the latter is what we get here. His piece, Angels and Devils, is a concerto for flute solo with flute orchestra. The flute orchestra consists of 3 piccolos, 5 concert flutes, and 2 alto flutes. So this is a, obviously very fluty piece of music, not as wacky as some of Brant's sounds. The fact that he's this into flutes and played the flute himself, he was also, it's related to the fact that he was also very fond of flute-like instruments. And his sense of humor and his fondness for flute-like instruments is brought out in the fact that he wrote a composition that was portraits of the Marx Brothers, that was scored for tin whistle with a chamber ensemble. But on this album, we also have the music of Irving Fine, a Boston-born composer and one of the Boston School of composers, which also included the likes of Leonard Bernstein and Lucas Foss. This is excerpts from Music for Piano. It's 2 of the 4 movements from that suite. And Mutability, a cycle of 6 songs for contralto and piano, based on poems by the British poet Irene Orgel. So, music of Henry Brant and Irving Fine. Next, a release from 1966, the music of Wallingford Rieger, Otto Luning, the label founder, and Colin McPhee. Wallingford Rieger was born in Albany, Georgia in 1885, studied music at Juilliard and then in Berlin, but returned to America when the United States entered the First World War. He then taught music in Des Moines, Iowa, up until 1922, when he was arrested on charges of indecent exposure, being accused of being the so-called nude maniac who had been terrorizing the women of Des Moines and had performed a naked clog dance in the University Square. We don't know if he really did it or not, but it's a good story. Rieger was strongly influenced by the music of Schoenberg. Now the piece on this album is his Fantasy and Fugue for orchestra and organ, Opus 10, and according to the album cover, it was composed in 1963, and that would make it a very late composition indeed, because Rieger died in 1961. The correct date is 1930. 63, I'm guessing, is the recording date. This is a recording that must be licensed from Polish National Radio, because it's the Polish National Radio Orchestra recorded by Polskie Nagrania in Poland, of all places. The composition, Fantasy and Fugue, is a very lively piece with colorful orchestration and vigorous rhythms and a massive final climax and a cool organ part that requires 2 players. Next, we come to the label founder, Otto Luning, who was born in Milwaukee in 1900 and spent his teen years in Germany and Switzerland, where besides studying music, he worked in the theater, including with James Joyce's English Players Company. He returned to the USA in 1924 and became a pioneer of tape music and electronic sound design. And together with Vladimir Ussachevsky, I've talked about that record, Luning founded the Columbia-Princeton Electronic Music Center in 1958. And he was one of the founders of the CRI label. And his piece is Synthesis for Orchestra and Electronic Sound from 1960. And this piece features very colorful writing for the orchestra for the first 3 of its 5-minute length. And then the orchestra is abruptly replaced by electronic trilling sounds that are eventually joined by percussion. And finally, there's a short closing statement by the orchestra. But it's an odd little sandwich with the electronic section kind of standing alone from the orchestrated parts. And then the second piece by Lüning is the Fantasia for Organ, 1929. It's just a cool, brooding excursion for solo organ. And the last composer is Colin McPhee, a Canadian-American composer born in Montreal in 1900, same year as Otto Lüning. And he lived in Bali through the 30s, so he is strongly influenced by Indonesian music. And his piece is Nocturne from 1958, which is a pleasant and dreamy piece featuring passages of his trademark Orientalism. We'll move forward to 1977 for this release of the piano music of Dan Rudyard, who was a mystic, an artist, and a novelist, as well as a composer. The artwork on the album cover is by him. He was born Daniel Chenevière in Paris in 1895 and educated at the Sorbonne and the Paris Conservatoire. Moved to the United States during World War I, where he became involved in various occult pursuits, including theosophy, astrology, and Eastern religions. And he adopted the name Rudyard, which had some Eastern significance. His piano music is placid and meditative, looking back to Satie as well as ahead to the New Age movement. And on this album, it's the only album that has a photo of the composer on the back out of this lot, where we see him together with the pianist from this recording, Marcia McCulloch. This next album is also a 1977 release, with side one being devoted to the music of Richard Trithall. And if Dan Rudyard was a French composer who emigrated to America, Richard Trithall was an American composer who emigrated to Rome, where he spent most of his career. His brother was Gil Trithall, Dr. Gilbert Trithall, who had a symphony recorded on CRI, but is probably better known for his silly records of country music played on the Moog with titles like Switched on Nashville. But this is Richard Trithall, and we have two pieces by him, one long and one short. The long piece is the Variations on a Theme by Franz Joseph Haydn for a woodwind quintet and tape. Both of these pieces heavily feature tape manipulation of pre-recorded material. So this piece takes, as the title suggests, a theme by Haydn, specifically the St. Anthony Chorale from Haydn's Divertimento No. 1, and cuts it all up in musique concrète fashion and uses it together with the woodwind players to just comment on the original tune, which we finally hear in its original form at the very end of the piece. And the second piece on the side, the very short, well, not very short, 6-minute piece, is Omaggio a Jerry Lee Lewis, which is misspelled. They have bad Italian on the front cover, correctly spelled on the back with no H. This is actually the recording of a whole lot of shaking going on, treated to musique concrète procedures, and it's a bit of a hoot. The next piece is by Joe Hudson, a composer born in Cleveland, Ohio, and educated at Kent State University and Columbia University, where he was a student of Mario Davidovsky, who will show up on the next album. And his piece is Sonare, which is kind of similar to the first Trithal piece, because it's music for a small chamber ensemble of violin, flute, clarinet, piano, and percussion with tape. So the whole album features tape music. I forgot to really emphasize that. Players and tape, it says right on the cover. So Sonare is the piece by Joseph Hudson, or Joe Hudson as he's called in the notes. I guess he's just a regular Joe from Ohio. And finally, music for tape without the live instruments by Randall McClellan, a young composer at this time, born in 1940 in Rochester, New York. Like Colin McPhee, Randall McClellan was very interested in Eastern musical traditions and strongly incorporated that in his music and his philosophy. He was also very interested in the tortoise as a sort of totem of this composition, and the tortoise is an animal that's close to my heart too, so yay on Randall for that. This piece, Music of the Spheres and Processional, is actually the first movement of a 4-part electronic suite called Tortoise Journeys. McClellan is probably better known for his New Age music, healing music, the healing music of Rana in a couple of volumes that came out later. But this is when he was still a bit more on putting his music out through the academic process. So, music of Randall McClellan. Next, an album of classic electronic music from the late 50s, early 60s period. Music of the bleep bloop variety. I love this stuff. This is actually a 1976 release, but it's a reissue of music from two albums from the 60s. An album on the Sonova label from 1963, featuring the music of the Turkish-American composer Bülent Arel, the Argentine-American composer Mario Davidovsky, told you he was coming up, and the Chinese-Russian-American composer Vladimir Ussachevsky. Ussachevsky was born in China to Russian parents because his father was in the Russian army, and he was a Russian army officer stationed in China on the Chinese branch of the Trans-Siberian Railway. But he came to America, so it all worked out. And this is augmented by two tracks from this album, the 1967 release on the Heliodor label, and the two tracks are by Kenneth Gaburo, an American-born composer from Somerville, New Jersey. Music on the channel before, specifically this album Maledetto, and there's a fantastic album of his electronic music on Nonesuch, and one of the pieces on this album that I just showed is called For Harry. Well, the Harry in question is Harry Partch, and so I'm closing out the video with this album released in 1966, Music of Harry Partch, and it's an album-length composition titled And on the Seventh Day Petals Fell in Petaluma. And they just shortened that to Petals on the front cover. This was composed 1963 through 64, revised in 1966, and performed here by the Gate 5 Ensemble under the direction of the composer, which is inevitable because, as you can see from the photos on the back, best we can get of the instruments. Partch's instruments are completely unique because his tuning system was completely unique, and his music is impossible to play on standard instruments. And his pieces of art are just wonderful sculptures. He described himself famously as a philosophic music man seduced into carpentry. And so this is the result of that carpentry. They're not the greatest photos. It's really worth seeing a release that has good color images of these amazing instruments. This is a very tightly composed piece of music, and it's a great one for getting to understand the sound of Harry Partch's instruments, because it consists of a total of 23 verses. Each verse is a duet between two of Harry Partch's unique instruments. Each duet is 1 minute long, and it's just a kaleidoscopic series of these sounds. And then, okay, that lasts for 23 minutes as it goes from verse 1 to verse 23 of the duets. Then they're combined. So verse 1 and 2 are played together, verses 3 and 4 are played together, verses 4 and 5 are verse 5 and 6 are played together, and so on until the very end when there's an odd number. So verses 21, 22, and 23 are all played on top of one another. So the colors that come out of that are just amazing. The rhythms that come out of that are just amazing. The music of Harry Partch is always amazing. So on the seventh day, petals fell in Petaluma. So that's 6 albums from the Composers Recordings Incorporated label. As I said at the beginning, there are literally hundreds of releases on the label, so in the future I may well do more. Do another one, a sequel to this. The album did begin releasing albums in 1956, continued up till 2003, and then the company was formally dissolved in 2007. But in the meantime, the rights to all the catalog transferred over to New World Records, so they keep the stuff around. You can even find it on Bandcamp today as far as digital download versions of the CRI catalog. So that is a look at CRI. Thanks very much for watching. Be well, and I'll talk with you again soon. Bye-bye for now.